We will. Right. We are recording this session. So I'd just like to introduce you to Tom Smith. He's been working at the Blind and Low Vision New Zealand for almost 2 decades in a variety of roles. He started out as the training adaptive technology to blind and low vision users for the first 6 years. And then he went into web accessibility, providing training and speaking at many conferences about digital accessibility and creating accessible content. Now, he's now at his happy place at Blind and Low Vision New Zealand Library. And so Tom is going to follow up on this week's session, which is covering the accessibility features of mainstream technology that is commonly used in the library environment. And the focus will be on accessibility features of the iOS and Android devices, Braille, Magnification, and synthetic speech. So he'll do his presentation and then there'll be an opportunity for questions at the end. And if we need to go over time, answering questions, he's very happy to stay on for extra time. And we'll be making the link available for the recording later on if you can't capture the whole thing. But thank you for joining us today, and I'm now going to hand over to Tom.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much. It's nice to see so many boxes on my Zoom screen. I'm absolutely thrilled and delighted. So this is the first of the 4 workshops we're going today. I realized when I wrote what I was going to put in the session, I probably put in quite a lot for an hour. So I make sure, hopefully you've all had a coffee and that you're all strapped in and ready to go. There's just a couple of things I just wanted to quickly touch on first before I get through. Firstly, one of the things we want to do here at Blind Low Vision NZ is create a much better relationship with public libraries and collaborate a lot more. So don't think this is sort of like a drop and then we're going to run away and leave you. If you're after this presentation, you've got a lot more questions and you want to find out a lot more, that's great. And we want you to come to us. Don't think, oh, Tom's a really busy, I am busy, but he's a busy guy and you're interrupting. That's what we want. We want you to come to us to sort of answer any questions and stuff. So this is kind of a little bit of a taster. When you get to know me, I use a lot of cooking analogy. So I sort of see it as like an amuse-bouche of different accessibility features because we've only got really an hour to get through. The second point that I want to get through is that I'm non-disabled, and I realize that I'm a non-disabled person talking about these features. And so I don't claim to have any lived experience of what it's like to have as a disability. I've been in the industry for very close to 20 years. But I want to kind of make that very clear. And how I see myself sitting in here is that there needs to be a lot more awareness about the technology and the solutions that are available. There also needs to be a lot more work done in the area. I subscribe to more of a social model of disability, which is where our society and our environment sort of has accessibility issues, rather than a more of a traditional medical one, which is where the person has the disability. So I just wanted you to I wanted to sort of be quite open about that. And so there are a lot of great disability advocates that are out there. And but I see myself as being sort of more being able to show you what the tools are and the technologies are that are available. So I'm just going to do, I've got a presentation. I know this said it was a workshop, but you'll be pleased to know I haven't made you do any sort of tricky exercises. I have a few little things involved all the way through. So I'm just going to go through and do a screen share. Now we're just going to try something a little bit new with the screen share. It's in beta. So fingers crossed it'll work out. If it doesn't, we can just go back to the normal one. This is where I can use my presentation as a virtual background. So hang on, pistol. Right, is that all working? I think, see if you nod, great. Okay, so I think we've covered this bit. So today, oh, hang on, have I just, hang on. No, I'm not sure what. Won't be a moment, just hang on. I'm just sort of like trying to work out what you can see and what I can see.
So we can only see this, everyone's talking, you know, faces now.
Okay, right, I'll go back to basic.
Might be best.
Yeah. Oh, I'm glad it went wrong very quickly. Right. Okay, so today the things that sort of I wanted to talk about was Apple iOS and iPad accessibility. So we're going to talk about some Android accessibility, a little bit about magnification, synthetic speech or text to speech, and then finally a little bit about Braille. And as I'm saying, these are just very sort of tip of the iceberg stuff. There'll be people here that I think will know a lot more. I think that there needs to be a lot more covered, and I couldn't agree more about these things. But really my goal for this is to get people hungry to learn sort of more about it. And I think the big takeaway I want to get away is that there is a chance that your library content is more accessible than you realize, even though there still needs to be a lot of work done. There's some technology tools that are actually available. And so one of the big areas I think that needs to be a lot of work done is awareness of a lot of the solutions that are already available. And the reason why I've sort of cherry picked a few things to be able to help out to demonstrate what's actually already out there that I know that people are using. Because I think for me personally, I think the heartbreaking thing will be if someone comes to a library and they kind of, or they've say if they've been using a public library all their lives and saying they're going through sort of a journey of some vision loss, and they make this assumption, oh, I can't use the library anymore, when there's tools that are actually there that could help them that people don't know about. Right, so I'm going to sort of just dive straight in. So the first one is dealing with iOS and Apple. Now, the reason why we sort of pick on Apple devices straight off is because they are probably the most popular device in terms of accessibility. It's not that Apple is sort of good in this space. I think once you in the accessibility space, you develop a love-hate relationship with all the big tech companies because they have a very checkered past of being accessible and not accessible, and it can change rapidly in short notice. But the reason why Apple is sort of like quite accessible, and pretty much the one I focus on is the iPad, because that's the one, is because Apple own the hardware, they own the software, and they own the accessibility features that are on there. So they've created a kind of a nice system for themselves to make it easier, to make it sort of quite accessible. So my iPad is very, very similar to your iPad that you have. And so this makes the challenge of accessibility that much easier than a lot of the other devices that we've got. I mean, even sort of for like a Windows machine, for example, everyone's going to be quite different in how they have it all set up. But iPads don't change that much. So that's why we kind of pick on the iPads for that reason. And these aren't my words, but people refer to the sort of Apple and iPhone as the gold standard of accessibility. I think I'd probably say maybe silver or bronze, but I don't know what gold would be then. Okay, so I've just, what I've done is I've got some quick little demonstrations of some of the features that are built into the iPad. And so the three that sort of like wanted to talk about of the accessibility features for the vision ones is VoiceOver, the Zoom, and the text display and size. And the reason why I cherry picked these ones I know people use, and ones that I know that that you can actually play around with and stuff. And I think there's another theme that I want to sort of try and get across, is that I think there's some sort of sense that a lot of these accessibility tools are, specialized tools that you can't go in and sort of examine and or play around with. And we need more people to do that, is kind of my belief. More people need to kind of understand how these works, and so that sort of gatekeeping of thinking these are expert tools and you have to know exactly how they work. Where I think it's from my experience, seeing people team together and figuring it out seems to be more of my experience with people, how they use it. So a good example of this is a screen reader. And a screen reader is probably the most common way that someone who is blind or has low vision is able to get the information out. I've got a little demonstration of Voiceover that's coming up. But Voiceover is the name of the screen reader that's built into the iPad and iPhones. So it's already there. To be honest, as a sighted person trying to use Voiceover, there's a lot of mental gymnastics that's required to kind of understand how it works. I mean, it is a form of output, and it's a kind of mad genius that they managed to take a plate of glass and develop that so that someone who has little or no vision to be able to navigate around so well. But the thing about the screen reader, and going back to my my point about saying that it's sort of a challenge to get around and well, not just a challenge, but it's kind of like a toolbox is probably the best way I think about it of trying to sort of navigate around to different apps and software. And the example I remember giving was actually there's a screen reader for a Windows PC that's called JAWS, and it's probably the industry standard for JAWS. There's also one that's called NVDA now, which is free, which is really good. And just as a quick little story from a screen reader point of view, so a screen reader reads out everything that's on the screen. I was working with this wonderful woman, Lisette, and one of the things that can be quite challenging when you're using a screen reader is doing text formatting. So you're changing the font sizes, and you're changing around the fonts and copying text from different places. And so this can be quite a challenge. But Lisette, being a soprano vocalist, had perfect pitch, and we were able to, within JAWS, assign piano notes to the different text formatting so that she could identify all the different text formats based on music notes. And I still remember that experience really well, because I mean, that was a long time ago, but it really got me thinking that it's into getting that problem-solving mindset with accessibility. They are not one size fits all. Everybody's obviously unique in how they will go to it, and I think we as disabled and non-disabled people need to sort of come together so we can know what the solutions are, to say, hey, try this. Okay, that didn't work. Let's try this and try some other things. Okay, so I've got some short little video clips. The reason why I've got these as little screen grabs rather than doing a live demonstration, live demonstrations always make me nervous, but Voiceover is so clever that if I have an iPad connected to Zoom, it thinks I need the Voiceover and you don't, so you don't hear it. So that's why I went through and tried that out, but I've got a little demonstration to show you. Okay. So this is sort of my iPad here. How Voiceover works, and in some sense, it's very straightforward. Okay, so you see it came up. I actually have you can change the voices. By default in New Zealand, it comes out with an Australian accent. I changed mine to Moira, which has an Irish sort of lilt to it, which I kind of like. You can see visually straight away what it does is it highlights what it's actually speaking, and how I actually navigate around it completely is by using gestures. So in this case, when I'm actually doing it, I'm swiping. Is that I'm just swiping left to right, or swiping right. And then you double tap to open. And all I'm doing to navigate around that is just swiping from left to right. And what it does is it just goes from the top of the screen to the bottom of the screen. And it works really nicely within that format. There are some areas within the iPad that are more accessible than others. Obviously, you've got third-party apps, and so you don't really have a lot of control. But Apple are pretty good at gatekeeping what's in their app store about what's making sort of quite accessible. Now, in Workshop 3, I'm focusing on Libby and hopefully Press Reader, because my access, I tried to log into Press Reader yesterday and didn't have a good, and actually demonstrating what these tools are like with those library services. So that's all of Workshop 3 is going through. So this is to try and get a little bit of a warm up to that so that you kind of have a bit of a better understanding at that time. Hang on, how have I? That, hang on, it's gone back.
Enjoying the first LIANZA accessibility workshop. Text field.
And you kind of see there it sort of butchered pronouncing LIANZA a little bit.
We can't really hear it very well, that's all.
Oh, right. Okay. I can turn the...
Double tap to edit.
Is that a little better or?
Note.
Oh.
Text field is editing. Hello, everyone. I hope it full stop. Space.
Hang on. I wonder if in the share. Hang on. Here we go. Let's try this again. I just needed to hit the.
Voiceover on. Landscape. Canva. Page 2 of 4. Translate. Double tap to open. Shortcuts. Magnifier. Tips. Keynote. Numbers.
Yep, that's great.
Word. Maps. Notes. Double tap to open. Selected. Hello everyone. I hope you are. Notes. Toolbar. OneNote. Enter full screen. Checklist.
So just repeating what I'm saying, in order to move from one item to the next, all I'm doing is just swiping right from left to right. You can actually use your finger and like navigate around, and that's one way people can do it, and they search around. So there's even there's different philosophies of how you should use it. I think when you're starting out, this is kind of like a nice safe way. And I picked notes deliberately because it's a very sparse kind of environment, because if it's a lot of things, it can sort of get a little bit sort of overwhelming.
Camera. Show handwriting tools. Note actions. New note. Button. The 4th of May, 2022, at 10:38 a.m. Note: hello everyone. I hope you are enjoying the first LIANZA accessibility workshop. Text field. Double tap to edit. Note: text field is editing. Hello everyone. I hope.
Right, and you notice even with typing, there's actually 3 typing modes within VoiceOver, which again are sort of just different levels of being more advanced. So whether you can sort of navigate around and then it will say T and then it will enter in a T. Once you get a little more comfortable, there's things that can make typing a lot faster. I think probably the summary is that VoiceOver doesn't need to slow you down. Some of the VoiceOver users I've seen will use an iPad or an iPhone faster than a lot of sighted people I know. So it doesn't need to sort of slow you down in any capacity. So that's a very quick taster of VoiceOver. And the important thing I wanted to sort of get across with that is that this is used by a lot of people. It's a very popular tool within it. I think as a sighted person or a non-disabled person using it, it's very hard to kind of really engage what the experience is actually like. And you can't, I think I've seen some people say, oh, I used VoiceOver to check the accessibility of this book or something. And I think as a sighted person, you can't sort of really say that. So you really do need to get someone who's what I call like a VoiceOver user to sort of to give it a go. But the thing is, I think you do need both. You need just to be able to sort of double check that everything is accessible if you're ever actually using it. But it's a yeah, it's a really out there kind of solution, but it works very beautifully for the people that it does work for. And what's even harder is that even if you are a screen reader user from sort of a Windows machine, it's hard to even transfer that knowledge over because there's so much gesture-based things to learn. Right, so that's just a little taster of VoiceOver. And as I said, if I could probably do a whole morning session on just on VoiceOver. We just need to sort of to move along. And the next feature that I just wanted to show on the iPad was the zoom or the magnification. In the iPad, they call it zoom. And here's a little demonstration. There's no sound in this one, so it should be okay. And the weird thing about the zoom control is the gestures that you have to use to that you can use it. You see here, I'm zooming in and out. That is a 3-finger double tap and drag. Even saying that is quite tricky, let alone sort of getting through. But you see, what I find impressive about the magnification in here is how crisp it is when you actually when you magnify it. So I've gone back into notes to see that you can see the message. All the text is quite crisp that you've got. So that's the zoom feature that's available there. I don't know so many people use that because this third feature that I've got is probably a little bit more popular. And that is the feature to change the text size within the iPad. And a lot of people have this set up. And so what I did is a little screen record of just the process of doing that. So if you're going into the settings of your iPad, and there's accessibility on the left-hand side, and we've got text controls, and you've got larger text. And then all you simply do is move the slider across, and you can even see in real time the text getting bigger. Now there's even a button there for larger accessibility sizes. You get really big. Now what's great about this compared to Zoom is that you still have all the information on the screen. So you can see here the difference here that you've got all of the text that's on there. So that's why there's generally a preference to make the text bigger and rather zooming in, because it can get kind of disorientating when you're using sort of those forms of magnification. And that's a nice easy one. You don't need, obviously that's the maximum size you can magnify it to. So you can increase the magnification like that a little bit more. Okay, so that was just a very brief introduction into the vision accessibility tools that are in there. There are far more that are actually in there, but I want to sort of cover through the other ones and which one, and sort of cherry pick which ones I think will be appropriate to you all in the public library sort of instance, public library sort of environment. So within physical and motor, these are often categorized for people that have more sort of physical disabilities. And so probably the main one that's in there is what are called switch controls. And that's a way of actually navigating your iPad using switches. You can get them as sort of as third-party devices. The one I've seen is like what's called a Big Mac, and it's a big button. So it means you can do everything on the iPad just by pressing one single button, which still blows my mind that you can actually do. I have actually done this. You can actually control your iPhone or your iPad just by moving your head. So you can actually assign the camera control of your head moving to the left as like a swipe, and you can assign your head moving to the right a double tap. And so not even touching the screen, just by moving your head, you can actually do it. So these are obviously more sort of physical controls. The one that I really wanted to point out that I think that might be helpful, or the one I want to highlight, is one that's called touch accommodations. And this is just a screenshot of that screen. And the reason why I like this sort of the touch accommodation is because I have used it for people before. It's really helpful with people. I mean, a lot of the people that we work with are seniors, and they're getting sort of older in life, and they might have a little bit of a tremor. And obviously, if you're dealing with like double taps and sort of like long taps, you can actually change those settings in these devices straight away. So here in the middle of the screen, for example, is an option to ignore the repeat. So if someone was tapping something and they have a tremor and they accidentally tap it a couple of times, you can switch that setting on so that it will ignore that. and you've got the hold duration, so you can sort of like change how long if you want to click and drag things. So again, these are, I think, a great example of features that I think people don't even realize that they're there, and that you can sort of think, oh, I can't use this device because you know, I can't use it. But there are people that have done a lot of work to be able to help people out. So this is why I kind of wanted to sort of shine a light on this one. And so I think this one here, the tap assistance one, is an interesting one, in that it's you know, whether it uses the first touch or the final touch that you've done on the screen. So some people sort of like, they might slide their finger across. That was an issue that we used to have, was people were sliding their finger rather than a specific point. And so you can say, well, okay, choose the first one or the last one. Okay, the other really important area of the features within a sort of iPhone or iPad are hearing changes. And probably the big thing to realize is that the greater emergence of Bluetooth hearing aids that are coming through the market. It's becoming sort of increasingly common, and there's even one that's called for that you see more hearing aids that are called that are MFI. I'm not sure if it's MFI or MiFi, but these hearing aids are made for iPod, or made for iPod, made for iPhone and made for iPad, so that they work, you know, seamlessly together to be able to connect through. So you can imagine how like how, you know, really useful this would be if you've got your iPhone, you're connected with Libby, you're listening to an audio book, and the audio book's being connected directly to your hearing aids, rather than having to listen to it and then sort of adjusting your hearing aids to it. It's actually being transmitted straight through to it. And so there are specific settings for it. It's rather than sort of setting up a Bluetooth device in your hearing aid. As Bluetooth, I think the reason why Apple have done this is that they've recognized that Bluetooth has some limitations, and so they've sort of improved that sort of feature to be able to do it. So it's really good to see in that space, because we actually have an increasingly amount of people who are not only have a vision loss, but they also have some sort of form of hearing loss as well. So it's great to sort of be able to transmit some of that information across into sort of directly into the hearing aids. And the other one that I wanted to touch on in the hearing is closed caption styles. So I've become kind of a regular user of, even as a non-disabled sighted person, I use the closed captions feature quite a lot on Netflix and Disney. But one of the things you can do on your iPad, at least, is you can actually change it. And you can change the default size. So this here is like a screenshot of the subtitles section within the accessibility features. And so you can on the screen, you can even change the font. You can even upload fonts to your iPad now, and so you can choose one. And you could even have size and colors. You can change the color and the opacity. You can change as well. So all of those things you can actually change, especially if the text is a bit too small. So that's just another one that I kind of wanted to put a little spotlight on. Okay, so the fourth and last category of the iPad is one that's they refer to as general, which I guess is their version of miscellaneous, of things that didn't fit anywhere else. The two I want to talk about is guided access and the accessibility shortcut. The guided access, I mean, it's an accessibility feature, but I probably see it's more useful for parents, because what you can do is you can lock the iPad to a certain screen so that people don't go into other areas, and you actually have to supply a PIN number to get out of it. You can even block off parts of the screen so that they can't connect to that kind of screen. If there's any Android users out there, it's kind of the closest thing I think Apple has to pinning an app, so that you can actually just lock it so that sort of if they're using that, they can only go to one. I put that one out there because I think it might be a handy feature, especially in sort of like a library environment when you've got, if someone's sharing an iPad and they want to be able to make sure that they only stay within that app. You can do that with guided access. It has quite a lot of features available to it. The accessibility shortcut is is a way of being able to, you can change what pressing the home button 3 times does. I've seen this used, some people use it as a hack for all sorts of different things, but it's really useful, the accessibility shortcut, because I know, for example, people, the amount of times somebody accidentally starts VoiceOver and they have to get me to say, Tom, can you switch it off for me? But if you have it set up as the accessibility shortcut, it's really easy to turn it on and off. And that goes the same with a lot of the other features that you've got. So it's so that's the home button 3 times. Right. How am I getting on? Android. Okay, so we finally moved away from Apple, and within the accessibility space, we do have the Android fanboys that sort of say like, oh, you know, Apple isn't that great. Android definitely sort of on the heels of Apple in terms of accessibility. I think the important thing that we recognize is obviously the price point. I think let's face it, like the Apple devices are expensive. They're sort of a premium device. And the big advantage of Android is that, you know, they're a lot lower in cost. And from a feature point of view, I mean, I personally own an Android phone, and I think, you know, it's a much better option for me. Where it becomes challenging in terms of accessibility is just there's so many more different devices. So you've got Android, but it might be on like a Samsung or a Huawei or Oppo or all the different things, and then they clamp down on their flavor of all the features that on those phones. So then it becomes hard to kind of know exactly what each phone is. Like my phone has a senior mode, which I thought was doesn't sound quite, makes me feel a bit uneasy that it's even called senior mode, but that it's just sort of enlarges the text and does all the sort of like what stereotype things that you think might be required. So that's kind of the reason why Android doesn't get talked so much about in this space, is not because Android is worse, is that it's a harder problem to solve, as I talked about with Apple. Apple own the operating system, the software, the hardware. And Android, it's all over the place. So you've got a lot of people having to work together to be able to get it right. But Android do have their version of VoiceOver called TalkBack. It's gesture-based, works in a very similar way to things. So it's kind of really my point with Android is there's no excuses. It might be harder to kind of maybe figure it out because it might be unique to that phone or that device on how it works. But usually there's some solutions to be able to get there. Now, one of the benefits of Android is because you can use what's referred to as a launcher. And for those who don't know about launchers on Android, it just completely changes what your phone looks like and how you operate it. And one of the ones we advocate for quite a lot here at Blind Low Vision NZ is one that's called Big Launcher. And what Big Launcher does, I've got a screenshot of it on the phone, on the screen, and it just takes everything and makes it sort of like basically your whole phone now is sort of like a magnified version of what it typically is. And when you've got 6 icons on there, they're really large. You've got the battery in the phone take up sort of like a good width of the screen. It's really well designed. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because people use it. I know people, you know, that it's really popular and it's quite functional. It's free as well from the App Store. I've got it on my phone, and you can change the settings of what's in there as well. So you could sort of, if you were a big library fan, you could make one of those buttons Libby or Overdrive or whatever. So you have the functionality to be able to do that. So so it's nice and clean, I think, is probably the way I would just describe it. So that's a very brief dip into Android. Saying that very, very on the toes of Apple. Okay, so we're changing lanes a little bit here. So we were talking about Apple and Android. And so if you remember right at the beginning, the next thing that I wanted to talk about briefly was magnification. Yes, we still have people with the old school magnifying glasses, still kind of reading up close. But the thing I wanted to sort of do a spotlight on is that there are now digital magnifiers. that will actually help with the contrast and make things a little bit easier. They can change around the color combinations to help people out. These are also very popular, that sort of these digital magnifiers. And the picture I've gotten here is a little a digital magnifier. It's quite small. It fits in your hand. It's called the Pebble HD. And on the screen, you can see the text looks quite sharp, because what it does is it adds some sharpness and contrast to that text. But the big thing I just wanted to get across with magnification is that bigger does not always equal better. So getting something, sticking it in the photocopier, increasing the magnification up to 200% or whatever, and then saying, there we go, I've made it accessible, isn't really going to work for a lot of people. And I've seen this happen, and I've experienced it sort of like quite a lot, because it's intuitive. It's what you'd think you would do, is sort of like make it bigger and make it easier. And for some people, it is the solution, but it doesn't always improve things. And then the reason behind this is really just how different eye conditions can be. So one of this is probably the most common form of vision loss in New Zealand is macular degeneration. And I've got two photos here. On one on the left is of two women, and they're just giving each other a hug, and which is sort of representing normal vision. And on the right, there's macular degeneration. And what macular degeneration does is sort of it deteriorates sort of your central vision. So it sort of can be black. This is probably not the best example, but you can see how it's sort of the vision loss is actually quite sort of specific into the central part of your vision. So making text bigger, if you're trying to read, isn't necessarily going to help very much. Whereas, and we find this quite a lot, whereas actually made it worse rather than better. So going straight to magnification isn't always going to be a huge benefit for a lot of people. And then you have eye conditions like retinitis pigmentosa, which sounds like a sort of Harry Potter spell, but I think that that's almost opposite of this, where you have very good central vision, but your peripheral vision is hard. And again, magnification isn't going to be very helpful in that situation. Okay, so I said I'll jump around a lot in this presentation. So that was just a little brief thing of magnification, and I think my theme is that bigger isn't always going to be better for a lot of people. So some people, just keeping it the same size is going to help out. Now, another one that I picked on synthetic speech, because I think it becomes a bit of a debate for a lot of people over what's best over having a synthetic speech for people, or having a proper narrator reading out of this. And this is especially for audiobooks, on whether you want sort of Siri to read out your book, or I'm going to pick on Harry Potter again, or you want Stephen Fry to read out Harry Potter, or do you want Siri to be able to do it? And again, sort of like, I think I feel there's pretty much a good consensus on this now about how it all kind of works. And so what I think my experience is, and the feedback that I get, is that synthetic speech is totally fine for short pieces of work. I think there's an understanding of newspapers. By the time we got a narrator to come through and read it, and here at the Blind Low Vision, we have our own library that supports sort of that. We have newspapers, magazines, and audiobooks that are available to our members and clients. And the newspapers that we have are produced in synthetic speech, but that's because it's not feasible to even have a narrator come in and read it, because by the time they did it, with the news cycles the way they are, it would be out of date. And so I think people are quite understanding and sort of they completely sort of, but they understand how that as it would be nice to have all their news narrated, that it's kind of synthetic. Also people with reading emails, navigating around, and I think this is because of linking back to what I was saying with screen readers. People become accustomed to having using the screen reader for reading short pieces of text. But we do get really good feedback to say, when I'm reading my novel, I want a proper person reading it. And that's quite strong and loud, and hence why I wanted to put it in this, that. And I think hopefully you're all happy to hear is that, you know, that a synthetic AI still can't get that sort of feeling across within being able to narrate books. And I would probably have a, you know, have a guess that sort of that would be a long way away before an artificial voice or an artificial intelligence can, you know, spellbind people with reading a book in the way that I think it should. And well, I think we would all agree how it should be. But the newspapers, magazine articles, I think it's, you know, it's perfectly fine. So I think here, synthetic speech is getting better and better at the time. I think my fun fact is that people often, I think as a non-disabled person, you think natural sounding voices are what you want. But my experience and feedback from users is that it's speed, because people with synthetic speech, they usually speed it up, especially kids. Sort of like sometimes sounds to me like gibberish because they have it set so fast, but they've trained their ear to it so fast. Some of those fancy pants sort of like natural sounding voices, they don't go fast very well, so they don't like them. And so having a voice that goes fast seems to be more of an advantage than having a high quality or realistic sounding voice. Okay, on the bottom of this screen, I've written finding the button. And the reason why I've written this is there's an issue with synthetic speech that I see quite a lot. And it also incorporates a theme that I wanted to bring up. Now, finding the button is a, excuse me, is what I've got on the screen now is it's a web page, and in the bottom left-hand corner, it has a button that says listen. So this is great. It's got some audio in it to listen to the page, but how do you find the button to get there in the first place? And this is an issue that I see time and time again, that's sort of in the accessibility area, especially with like synthetic speech. I think it used to be kind of a bit of an issue in things like Press Reader, where you would sort of have the newspapers there, it would have like a read button, but then you had to be sure on like that you could navigate to the read button first with some form of speech so that you could actually read out the content. And this was often forgotten about time and time again. And as I was saying, this is a theme quite a lot. And again, with public libraries, and I'll get into it in the other workshops, is, okay, your you know, Libby might be quite accessible with VoiceOver that we looked at, but can you log in with a screen reader, or you know, can you search for a book when you're trying to find it? How is the search process like? Is it accessible? You know, is it actually even sort of like usable after you know, trying to find all the results? So it's more than just you know being able to read the book or you know, have the accessibility of the device. And then in some cases it might be, hey, you might need some help signing on for the first time, but then after that it is accessible. And this is what I kind of refer to as like a digital roadblock. And I think it's the reason why I sort of point this out is because something may be a digital roadblock, but then if you can overcome it, then you can still keep going. So there's not something, doesn't have to be necessarily inaccessible or not accessible. There can be sort of hurdles along the way that can be overcome sometimes. So that's just my little soapbox about synthetic speech, and a sort of led into my sort of accessibility roadblock part. Okay, now it's like activity time. So the last sort of one that we wanted to talk about was Braille, and I think Braille has this like a huge importance, but I think to learn Braille, I wish I could take credit for this, but it was actually an instructor called Diana Windsor in Wellington who showed me this. The best way to learn Braille is with eggs. And so what I'm going to do is, oh, hang on, giving away my. All right. So I'm not sure, it's gone a little sort of fuzzy, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these eggs, and as a little kind of tiny workshop exercise, I'll see if you guys can figure out the word that I'm going to spell out with the eggs in Braille. And believe it or not, it's been a while, but they actually physically used to do eggs to help people to get through. First thing about Braille, Braille is a code, it's not a language. So you're never going to see it as a sort of like an official language of New Zealand. It works, this thing here is referred to as a cell, and how these dots are worked out is with numbers. So it goes from the first, so there's a column, 2 columns of 3, so there's 6 dots, and by different arrangements of those dots produces different letters. So right, I'll give this a go. So I've going to put some eggs in here. Up on egg in 1, 2, and 3. I'm guessing people are going to guess what it is already. All right. So is this thumbs up from anyone that's got it? No. Okay. Okay. So I mean, all right. I'll scrap that. So in this case, we've got an L, which is like 3 eggs on one side and not on another. Wasn't sure how complicated this would be get. And then if I put the egg here and here, that would be like an I.
That's LIANZA.
Oh.
Well, you know.
Yeah. And then, so we've got 1 for A, and then I'll do an N. And then I can do a Z. And then finally do an A again. So yes, thank you. It was LIANZA. I don't like making workshop things hard on there, but I find I thought this is a really great way, because I think you're going to hopefully leave this and you go like, all right, Braille is eggs, and then sort of like it becomes sort of like quite clear what it is. What I do is all of the things I've talked about before are digital, and Braille is regarded as analog. And there's one thing that made me like become a much more bigger advocate for Braille, because there's this tendency, I can see how there's this tendency of thinking, hey, there's screen readers, there's all this technology out, do we really need, is Braille necessary anymore? And the answer is yes, it's very much necessary. And that's because of these 3 words that I snuck in before, which is Braille is literacy. It is absolutely required in terms of especially our kids being able to read and write, which I think we can all agree is vitally important. Screen readers are great in terms of being able to have the accessibility to digital content, but Braille is still kind of, I would go as far as is better at being able to learning about how to read and write. And actually, sort of experiencing this myself. Again, a little story. I'm a moderator of an accessibility email group, and I'm seeing more and more homonym errors with the screen reader users. Most of the people in the email group are using a screen reader, and I think at one point that illustrated this out was I had an email, and at the bottom it had the word chairs. It's spelled CHAIRS, like the chair that you sit on. I was really bamboozled by this for a wee while, because I wasn't sure, am I supposed to bring chairs, or it looked like it was part of a list. Often these are obviously spelt correctly because people are using their spell check, but it was obviously cheers as in goodbye, cheer, it was cheers. So we're seeing this more and more, and I think, and that highlighted to me how strong sort of like Braille is actually really required, still around, and still has a place within accessibility. Okay, so I could go on for ages about Braille, but I kind of did a few things on just some Braille tips so that I think things that will actually be really helpful for this audience. One is that there's digital Braille. I've got a picture after this. You can actually have what I refer to as Bluetooth refreshable Braille devices that connect to your iPad. You may not realize that the people are using Braille to access your content and you don't even know it. How they work is they have these little motorized pins that go up and down, and they're really cool about how they work. And the problem is that they're really horrendously expensive. You're talking about sort of a car kind of a price. So if there's ways they can start bringing those prices down for those things, we'll start seeing sort of more and more of those. But it is out there, and a lot of the kids are being able to use it. So there might be more Braille users than you think because they're not using the print, the print Braille. Secondly is creating Braille. The industry standard for creating Braille is a piece of software that's called Duxbury. And I think the reason why I highlight it here is because you don't have to be a Braille user to create Braille. And that's kind of a theme within Braille. They recognize that it's going to be people that don't read Braille that will be creating it. So that's really an important point. And so it's really not a nice piece of software from that point of view to be able to use. It even has add-ins for Word so that you can use it sort of straight away. Okay, you do need what's called an embosser, which is essentially just a printer, but it has pins in it that produce the Braille. But it's fairly straightforward. There's not really much to it from a user point of view, even if you don't know Braille. It's not something that you would require a lot of specialized training to be able to do. Although I do thoroughly recommend getting it proofread by someone who is a Braille user. But I just really want to say that sort of we shouldn't gatekeep creating Braille so that we want more people to use it. And I think by saying that it's not sort of like really hard, then hopefully we get more Braille out there. The third one, and most important, probably a really important one, is placement. Yeah. So we often get people that put Braille, but then how do you know where it is? It's a bit like the finding the button issue. So we get people that say, oh, we made this Braille plaque, but they stuck it in the wall somewhere. How will they know that plaque is there on the wall to be able to find it, to read it? So that's kind of a really important issue of like, if you can get what I call like Braille labelers that create Braille labels. So you need to kind of find a way of, if you are using Braille labels, that people know where to find them so that they can sort of actually read them. And the last one I wrote there was be cool. And that's an issue we have with Braille. You can actually get Braille fonts that simulate Braille. They're actually fine to use, but people don't have any problem with it. But the thing is that they're saying that, be respectful of Braille. Use it as it's still a form of communication. And people, I've seen sort of like covers of books or anything and it's gibberish with Braille. So I try to avoid doing that. You see Braille in forms of like in jewelry and in sculptures. And I think there's the sculpture in Wellington. That's actually a giant Braille poem. Not sure if it's still there. But then I think people can be a little bit, it's a matter of being sort of respectful to Braille to be able to, so that people can actually use it. And that's one of the biggest things we get with feedback. And probably the biggest one about that is ensuring that it is tactile enough to be able to be read. Sometimes, we here at Blind Low Vision have Braille on our business cards. We've had cards that we've had to throw away before because the Braille wasn't good enough for us to be able to be read properly. So it's ensuring that it's tactile enough. And again, that's where having, an actual sort of Braille user being able to get that feedback from them. Okay, so the last slide I've got is this picture of this young woman, and she has a digital Braille display with her iPad that sort of circles back to the beginning, what we're talking about before. So she's actually using the Braille display to navigate around her iPad, and this is sort of like the state that we're actually at, things. And it's really, like I was saying, I've been here like 20 years, and like I don't think we've ever reached a point where the accessible technology and the technology have been so sort of closer together, whereas before it was always a case of catching up, and now it seems to be getting closer together. Now on this Braille display, there is some blue buttons on there, and those buttons represent the different eggs of the Braille. So actually Braille typing, you have a specific Braille keyboard, one for every egg on the device. So that way you can actually probably type faster on a Braille keyboard than you can on a QWERTY keyboard, because you've only got 6 keys. There is a couple of extra ones for computer features, you know, you control shift things. But it's kind of nice to have a keyboard that only has 8 things. All right, so that was the last piece. I kind of see we're sort of like coming to the close. So just to summarize those features. So we did talk a little bit about the Apple and Android, and I wrote Apple and Android. My biggest sort of like things to hopefully to take away are awareness. These tools are actually available. I really would encourage you to have a look around. I think there is a little bit of a gatekeeping of thinking like these are very specialized tools. If it's on your phone, on your device already, then I think, you know, to be able to encourage people to use it and have a kind of that sort of problem solving and toolbox kind of mindset to it to be able to help people out. With magnification, it's really about making, you know, thinking that bigger isn't always better in terms of people that are using magnification. Well, one thing I didn't miss is that often sometimes just contrasting the colors as well. Glare is often as big an issue as being able to make things bigger. With the synthetic speech, it's the short clips for this synthetic speech, but with long things, there's still that kind of very strong preference to have narrators and real people to be able to read out, especially non-fiction books. And then the last one with Braille is that if you are ever thinking about using Braille, please do. I think we need sort of more of it around, because as I was saying, this is not my catchphrase. I've kind of borrowed this one, is that Braille is literacy. So that was just this first workshop. The second one that I've got is more about creating accessible materials. And I think, as most of you work for local council, you'll be happy to hear that actually a lot of that involves Word, or happy or not happy about that. Then the third one is more about, is aimed specifically at using the apps that are within the library, like Libby and Press Reader, and sort of focus on those and using some of the tools we talked about today. And then the fourth is about the Marrakesh Treaty, and so that the new guidelines that LIANZA have created to be able to help public libraries produce more accessible content.
Before we finish there, Tom,
Sure.
there are a couple of questions here.
Sure.
Rogelio is asking, is there a free basic online course to learn Braille?
Oh, good question. I'll find out, and if you can pass on his contact details. We used to have some training here, but I think it was just for our members. But there might be something online now. Yeah, it's a good question.
Okay. Oh, okay. So, Irene, have you put on here? You can learn online here. uebonline.org, getting started.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
yeah, that's
okay. So
that sounded right. That's
thank you, Irene, for answering.
Yeah. Thank you, Irene.
Could a 3D printer be useful? I can see a children's craft session connection here.
Yeah. Definitely. It blew my mind. I remember they made an accessible dice with the 3D printer, and then I remember working out that it was cheaper to 3D print it than take a photo of it and print it, which sort of blew my mind a little bit. Yes, I mean, we do have a team up in our Auckland office that produce tactile books, and admittedly it's not I think they've looked at 3D printing, but I think in terms of the different tactile nature, they use lots of different types of materials to differentiate the different colors. So it might be sort of felt and things to help create, and that's kind of almost a creative exercise in itself of kind of like finding out the right thing to be able to do it. So I think 3D printing will have some, I think, for me, I think it has a strong possibilities in terms of like, hey, you could print out what the Sphinx looks like, or the Eiffel Tower or something like that. I think would be really good, because then you could create a tactile representation of it. But I think in terms of books, it would still be tricky, because you're usually printing out only one medium.
Got another question. What about speech to text tools?
Speech to text. It's still a little limited. I haven't looked at it for a wee while. The industry standard in terms of accessibility used to be Dragon, but then Dragon wasn't specifically designed for accessibility in mind. It was really designed for people in warehouses that sort of to be able to do voice activating type things. And then there used to be kind of like a third piece of software you needed to be able to work with the voice commands so that JAWS didn't sort of listen to it. So you didn't say print and then JAWS, hear your computer saying print and then print it twice. However, in saying that, like my favorite sort of voice dictation thing in like Google Docs, and Google Docs is kind of like, it's accessible, but you kind of need to use so many the keystrokes and things that you need to use. You need to use about most of your hand for all these different keystrokes, but it's getting better and better all the time. And so I think that yes, we will get sort of, and I hear some of my colleagues here, they will tell Siri to do like basic text messages and things. So that's already there. You know, they're already using, they say, hey Siri, can you send a text message to, you know, that I'm running late, and not having to use the keyboard at all. So that's already there. Whether it gets to a sort of point where you can do longer form things, I think that's sort of where sort of still having your keyboard is going to come in handy. So yes, the technology is evolving, and I think it's getting better in that space.
Okay, all right. I think that's it for now. And that's good timing. We're just 3 minutes over. So I think that was really lots of information, great information. Thank you very much, Tom. And I'm looking forward to the next session in June. And I'm just going to say a karakia to close the event. Unuhia, Unuhia. Anuiha ki tu uru tapunui, kia wātia, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua e te ara tangata, koia rā e rongo, whakairia ake, ki runga, kia tina, huie, taikie. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you very much, Tom.
Oh, thank you very much. And please get in touch. I'm happy to talk at length about any of these issues. And there's the recording as well to go through things. So I realize it was a lot to get through, but if you've come through this with like, oh gosh, I need to know more, please get in touch.
And we will be putting the recording on our YouTube channel, so you can watch it again to pick up things that you might have missed. Okay, thank you, and have a great day, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.